Welcome back to another episode of Adventures in Machine Learning. I'm one of your hosts, Michael Burke, and I do data engineering and machine learning at Databricks. And I'm joined by my amazing co-host,
Ben Wilson. I do capacity planning at Databricks.
Today we are speaking with Daniel Miessler. He started his professional career in the U.S. Army and then left to attend university. And after graduating, he held a variety of security-related positions. For instance, practice principal for a software security testing service offered by Hewlett-Packard, head of business intelligence for information security at Apple, and then he also served as head of vulnerability management at Robinhood. Currently, he works at Unsupervised Learning, an organization that he founded, which focuses on increasing global security via software offerings and educational content. So, Daniel, kicking it off with a soft question. What
Okay.
personality traits make for a good security engineer?
Yeah, great question. Personality traits. Okay, I immediately went to skills, but personality traits, definitely curiosity and definitely tenacity. I would say that combination of, I guess, curiosity, passion, and discipline. So it's like I want to get this thing done, but it's driven by the interest of why things broke in the first place and the interest of like how could you best fix it.
Got it. Yeah, so the basis of that question is one of my first engagements at Databricks, I was put on a security audit for a customer in Australia, actually. And this customer was like, hey, make sure we don't have any security vulnerabilities. And I had done the onboarding, I had done the training, and I was just very terrified of missing something because security needs to be airtight. And if you miss a vulnerability, that's potentially extremely problematic. So, how do you think about creating 100% coverage of a security audit or a system analysis like that?
I don't actually. I think that we should accept that that's not going to happen and decide where to spend our valuable time. And I think it all comes down to having really good methodology and really good understanding of like the business side of the risk. So you basically have to know what you're actually afraid of. Um, one of my favorite sort of pieces of trivia about security is the fact that it's a combinational word from Latin. Se is without, and cura is worry.
Nice.
So you want to be able to produce this feeling of calm in something, in someone. So, so the goal is not remove all problems. The goal is to produce an environment in which somebody can prosper and work, right? So if you're doing this for a business, you want them to be able to run with scissors quickly with new ideas that they came up with and not harm themselves. Another good analogy for this is F1 cars or any race car, but F1 is like the extreme example. Brakes are there to make the car go faster without killing the crowd and the driver. So it's like, look, relax. Everything is fire retardant. Relax, we have the best seat belts. Relax, we have the best helmet. Relax, we have the best brakes, the best tires. Now go be crazy. So I think when you approach a security assessment, excuse me, the real question is, what level of risk do we need to get to? How safe do we need to be versus how unsafe are we able to be and still operate? Now let's build a methodology that predictably gets us to that level of risk. And those methodologies will be different if you're at like Los Alamos or something, and you've got to secure this really mission critical thing that you know is going to be attacked versus some random piece of consumer software. And that's what determines the methodology. And then, then it's just a matter of executing on that methodology really well. But first you have to understand that scope of the problem and then understand what a methodology would look like that gets you to the acceptable level of risk.
Got it. So it sounds like most other projects in business is you understand the business context, understand specifically for security the risks associated with a vulnerability. Then you list out sort of the potential solutions and do an ROI calculation of what it is worth. Is that roughly how you would go about it?
Um, I would say ROI, I would say more like a risk assessment of how, and I do this based on threat scenarios. So like a threat analysis, you basically say, here's what I'm worried about happening. All the different ways that an attack can happen or an accident or something. And here are the things I could do to reduce the risk of those things, right? But most importantly, you're calculating if this did happen, how bad would it be? And that's what determines how much effort you're going to put into finding that problem or fixing that problem. And that's what I use to make the methodology for assessing the security of these things. Because I want to be able to, like we were talking about before we started recording, I want to be able to flex from 5 security questions. I'm only going to do 5 things on this thing. What are the most important 5 things to test? I did this thing, I called it ATM. This was like probably 7, 8 years ago. I made this little methodology called ATM. I forget what the acronym was for, but it allowed me to say, if I only have 5 minutes to test this application, and I only have open source tools, and I'm not very skilled, what are the 5 things that I do? So I could change those variables. I could say I have 7 days to test this application. I have all the skills available, and I have the full set of closed source and open source tools, and it blossomed out the whole methodology. And I could slide the slider of time, and it would take things out. I could slide the slide of skill level, and it would take things out or add them. And so that's the way I dynamically think of it, is just like, what's the risk of the thing, and how much time do I have to assess? What are the most important things to look for in that time?
Got it. And then one more question about this framework. So the risk of a thing is fixed and defined. How do you think about the probability of something occurring and estimating that?
Yeah, this is I don't feel like I've ever really solved this one in a tangible way. I think I've gone to relying on intuition combined with empirical data collection. So, and specifically not using hard probabilities like a fair system or something like that. My personal belief, and I'm sure this will ruffle several people, my personal belief is that is not real science. I think it has the appearance of real science and that it's not true. And I've seen deployments of these types of systems where they try to put true science on those things. I actually think the science is sound. I think when it impacts with reality is where the problem is. I've seen people try to implement something like FAIR, for example, that does this. They put probability impact in dollars, and they bring in an army of like 10 consultants into a giant company, 18 months, 24 months, 36 months. The bills keep going up. And when they ask them, okay, now give me the spreadsheet, give me the calculation, they're like, still need to collect more data, still need to collect more data. So it's like, it just doesn't quite get you there. So I think the better thing to do is to say, what does reality look like? And let's do a rough estimation based on that. And what you're going to end up with something that looks more like a CIA system. Highly likely, somewhat likely. They have those sorts of qualitative things as opposed to quantitative.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes sense because these events by definition are super rare. So you don't have data and basically abstracting a lot of the complexity. So it's just these categories would simplify things a lot.
That's right. And I think, in my opinion, it's the only one that works. And most importantly, it's fast. So you can actually lock it in and start doing work, as opposed to a lot of these people that I'm talking about. They're like, a coup is 3.7 likely to happen in Dubai. And I'm like, 3.7, that's impressive. They're like, no, let me show you. And they start talking about all the math. And I'm like, guys, I don't think that's real.
Yeah,
Got it.
speaking from a perspective of somebody who is on the receiving end of one of those consulting reports, in order to secure and lock down a system, we had the same sort of questions to those people.
Yeah.
We're like, yeah, thanks for pointing out all of these crazy scenarios and the likelihoods of them, which we don't really agree with. It seems like you just copied this from some template that you had done for some other industry, and it's we don't even process that sort of data. We
Yeah.
don't have these sort of systems, but cool, thanks for the report. But you did miss this thing that, like, we gave you access to our database, and you did miss the fact that when you started your project 6 months ago, this other team was storing first name, last name, credit card numbers, and CV numbers in a database.
Right.
We don't do that anymore, but that's not on your report at all. And that's a huge security risk because,
Yeah.
the axiom that I always went by, which is kind of flippant, but it's like nobody's going to pursue something that's not worth their while,
Yeah.
like an attacker. So if you're some small company that's like selling things to consumers, no hacker is going to spend 30 days going after you if in the first hour they don't see something. They're like, hey, they're wide open here. Now I know I'm going to start digging. But compare that to some sort of like stock trader or something, or something dealing with finance. You probably
Sure.
have a lot of actors that are going after that and trying to poke holes all the time because the gains and rewards from that are potentially huge if they can find something, or some company that they know is collecting data on politicians or government figures or government, operatives somewhere. You're like, hey, I want to get a list of names and who these people are. That's ripe for the picking for other state actors and stuff, but nobody cares about your website that's selling shoes unless you're
Yeah.
doing something stupid like exposing credit card numbers somehow through an API.
Yeah, I agree with you. Mostly, I think the new economy of attackers slightly changes that calculus, however, because what happens is it's all just seen as like surface area that could be covered. And what they have is initial access brokers. So you have someone who specializes in getting into companies. And then what they do is they open the door and they're like, okay, everybody in. And they start bringing in these crews. And one crew specializes in carpets, one crew specializes in paint, one crew specializes in, and they're just like, yeah, come on in. And these different groups come in and spread out. And one of them is looking for access to Okta. One of them is looking for access to blah, blah, blah. And they're going to go find and get that thing and then sell that one little thing. So the things that you don't think are useful or valuable inside of your company, down to the smallest thing, there's a whole economy that only wants the set of emails that it can get from this company, because that's useful to an email broker. They're not there for any. In fact, if they saw Bank of America credentials or something, they'd just be like, "Oh, that's someone else's job. I'm here for emails." So just imagine that there's like 20 different threat actors let in the door from the initial one, and they're all looking for 20 different things to go sell to this larger economy on the dark web.
That's super interesting.
Yeah.
But it would make sense if you have if you're doing a Mission Impossible, you wouldn't go collect the $100 bills and the diamonds and the gold watches. You would have a specific target that you go directly towards because you have a fixed amount of time. So
you're
that
going
makes
in
perfect
to
sense.
unlock the back door, basically.
Yeah,
if
there's a
you're the
backdoor
initial.
guy, there's a diamonds guy, there's a watches guy or girl.
That's right. That's right. But I think your point, Ben, holds when it is an individual attacker, because they're looking for their thing.
Right.
And their thing is not likely to be a small company. Their thing is likely to be bigger targets because they're just one person. But when it's a giant economy, then it doesn't matter.
Cool. That's a super interesting.
And
I
scary.
never thought about that.
Yeah, very scary, yes.
So what do you think about, this is maybe slightly on topic, but also on topic for our podcast and yours. If we were to ask one of the big closed source LLMs out there right now, like GPT-4,
Mhm.
but like, hey, what are the best ways for me to test security access into a closed system? It's probably gonna, I've never asked it that, but it's probably gonna report back like, I can't answer questions like this or something, or it'll be
Mhm.
theoretical or academic. But if you were trying to ask it like, hey, I want a script that will do penetration testing on this type of network protocol, it's probably not going to answer it. Like, I'm not going to give you the tools to do something illegal, sort of thing. But with open source models that are of sufficient complexity, what do you think the impact to these sorts of dark web operating groups are going to be when somebody figures out to take, the next big open source model that's, say, 2 billion parameter model, or not 2 billion, 2 trillion parameter model that's as large or as powerful as GPT-4, and they train it on nefarious data about like how to do, here's all the security exploits and a bunch of 0-day exploits that nobody's really used yet, but we have, the knowledge of this, and then see what it can come up with. Do you see that as a potential game changer for the security world?
Yeah, great question. So yes and no. It's a bit counterintuitive here. So let me see if I can weave around this. So basically, imagine that you fed a 2 trillion parameter model all of human health data, every single doctor report, everything or whatever. And you're like, look, I need to find out how to live longer. And it's looking at every single person on the planet who's ever lived, their genome, everything. It would come back and it would say, diet and exercise.
Mm-hmm.
Similar to what you asked, the brokers who are attacking companies right now, they already have the list of the best way to get in. So the LLM is actually not going to help them that much. They might occasionally say, oh, and also think about this. But the way to get into a company is to hack somebody who has access already. That's basically diet. The other way is to like use email to spoof them so they click on a thing, and that's exercise. So there's only certain number of answers that everyone's going to collect on. However, if you can collect mass amounts of data about a specific enterprise, like all their different Slack messages, you basically dump all their internal databases. And this would be in the distant future when you have, millions upon millions of tokens. But if you could take like some significant portion of like a data lake for a company and drop it in and just be like, write me code that will automatically exploit this company.
Mm-hmm.
That's where you start to weaponize in the way that you're saying. So I don't think it'll help with the tactics themselves of like how you would go about doing hacks, because that's already locked in, like diet, exercise, and calorie restriction, that type of thing. However, contextual attacks against very specific companies and targets, the biggest thing it's going to be able to help with is it's going to tell you, going back to what we were talking about before about compression, you'll be able to ask it, I have 1 hour to get into this box. It's only between 3 and 4 a.m. on a Sunday. What should I do? Now it's going to be brilliant. Now it's going to be like, you could do 30,212 things, but you should probably do this first.
Yeah, do these things. These are going to probably give you access to the critical database that you would need to feed into a different LLM. They could say, you could ask that question, how should I bet against this company based on their plans for the next 6 months? That's in this data somewhere. And then you go and take that information and, buy a bunch of their stock or create a fire sale on them, which is going to create some serious problems for them, like maybe a competitor or something.
Yeah, that's a great point, because think of it this way. A really, really smart AI, let's say it's, superhuman, it's like 140 IQ, 180 IQ. You might ask, how do I break into this thing at 3 a.m. on Sunday? And it might say, is that the right question? What are you really trying to do to this company? And you're like, oh, shit. Yeah, maybe I guess I'm trying to make money off hacking them. They're like, well, do you want to make money or do you want to hack them? Because there's other ways to make money against them. Right. The other thing it could do is like, oh, you're starting your hack at 3 a.m. Well, in this data lake, I found out that system that you were thinking about targeting, it's not actually on at 3 a.m. on Sunday. Right. So that's the type of shaping that it could do, because it has that context.
But how does it get that context? Like, sort of, if you have the data lake dump, aren't you already done? You have all the information you need?
No, because you're human. You can't look at it. I'm talking about like terabytes of data, right? What would you do with like gigabytes or terabytes of data sitting in a data lake, and you're just like...
But how does the LLM get it, is my question.
The attacker would have to provide it. I mean, that would be that's part of the broker system, is like someone else provides that. So like the actual attacker purchased data from all these different locations that did the harvesting. And the harvesters don't actually know how to hack, but they bring this thing in. So now then the LLM submits this hand-built, here's what I think you should do, to the human hacker.
I see. Okay, so it's like two breaches almost. It's a breach in service of another more targeted breach.
Yeah, I mean that's what usually happens. Is these days, what happens is when you find out you're compromised, you go look for all the other ways you're compromised and by different actors. And oftentimes it's multiple people who have been in there or are still in there. Not always, but oftentimes.
Got it.
And this is just blowing my mind with what a security response would be like 10 years from now. Because right now you go in and you're like, all right, the firewall is not good, or hey, somebody was a victim of phishing, which now that like all of this access over the last 6 weeks that they were doing to these systems that technically they have access to, but for the last 4 years, they've never logged into these, and they certainly weren't downloading data from it.
Right.
And they're not even capable of understanding how to download from these systems, but they, for some reason, have access to it. And you start identifying all that stuff. I'm thinking about what's it going to be in 10 years? Do you have to change protocols? Do you have to sit there and be like, hey, now that all this information's out there about the actual systems architecture of how we run our back end, we now have to move to a different database stack and do a data migration and then lock things down so that the topography of what was released is no longer a threat vector for us. Do you think stuff like that is what a security response would be? We're like, hey, we got to lift and ship, or like, hey, all this data in AWS that got compromised, we now have to move to Azure.
I don't think so, because one, that'll be difficult, and maybe there was a reason you were on AWS versus Azure in the first place. But two, they're already going to have the plans for Azure as well. They're already going to know Azure inside and out. I think what's more likely to happen is that you have dueling banjos between armies of agents. So basically, you have your army of agents internally, blue team, that are just monitoring every single thing. This is the coolest thing about AI in my mind when it comes to like security, both as a society and also technical security, is the best thing AI is good at is doing something that was not being done before.
Mhm.
Looking at moles on people's arms. How many billions of people need moles looked at who can't get it looked at right now? Therapy, tutoring, monitoring open source projects for weird changes, monitoring open source projects for malicious code or dangerous code or vulnerable code. So I think you'll basically have your own agents running inside your company who are looking at every single log entry, every single opening, every single configuration, every single piece of code that gets committed. And it's watching to see if something bad is happening or something bad could happen. And it's constantly formulating a list of how it would attack us and what we should do to fix it and recommending fixes. And if you go further enough into the future, like 5 years, 10 years, it'll just be fixing those things. It'll be like, hey, I found this thing. Oh, hey, I fixed it. Right? Now, the dueling banjos is the attacker is trying to do the same thing from the outside. But they shouldn't have as much access to that data unless they're right there inside with you with the access to the same stuff. So they should be more on the outside guessing. Okay. And their things are also looking for a new port that opened, a new database that opened that you forgot about. But ideally, if your agents on the inside are watching close enough, they see that database port open before the attacker does, and they shut it down. And the security team can't do this. The security team of 50 people, they can't watch millions of ports, Kubernetes pods open and close constantly. It's just too much churn. It's too much data. But 1,000 AI agents can. They don't sleep. They don't rest. They just watch. So I think that becomes the game of like that back and forth between blue and red.
What about the companies that don't have the budget to support that? Are they just screwed?
No, I think it'll be extremely cheap. Now, not this super advanced cluster of advanced red teaming or blue teaming agents. That'll probably be more expensive. But to have a bunch of AIs watching logs, doing all that stuff, I mean, we're going to have that in the next 6 months, year. I mean, realistically, we have it now. It's just not widely distributed. I think that'll be trivial amount of money to have these things watching you at all times. Not only that, it'll just come natural. It'll come as part of the platforms. So like when you deploy Microsoft stuff, it'll be like, oh yeah, spin up this many agents. It'll cost you whatever, $12 a month.
So it'll be like cross-region replication for data. It's just like click a button, click how much money you want to spend on said button, and it'll go. And it'll be owned by the clouds theoretically? Or do you think it would be an independent offering or both?
The way I see that working is everything starts off as like an idea, it becomes like an app, and then it ends up in a platform. The question is just how long does that take? So I think what's likely to happen is when Microsoft, say, deploys something for you, all this infrastructure, they'll just be like, hey, give me your list of things you're worried about. Actually, we're bringing our own list of things you should be worried about, but let us know what you're worried about. And by the way, there's 10,000 AI agents crawling around your thing all the time. And if it sees any indication that any of these bad things are happening, it'll alert you.
I mean, we kind of have a version of that today with Copilot. You know, you're in VS Code as you're typing. It happened to me yesterday. I am a back-end developer, but I'm exploring front-end stuff for, to just learn and like build some new stuff. And I was writing some React code yesterday. I'm not super familiar with that framework, and I made an error. Of course, you know, TypeScript violation, and you know, Copilot's the little linter warned me. It's like, do you want to fix this? And I was like, yeah, Copilot, go ahead. And the response actually surprised me, because I'm on the beta of their most recent one, and it provided this paragraph of text that kind of explained why it fixed what it did.
Hmm.
And it was basically like, hey, you're not consuming the index here in this list iterator, and this is bad for performance, but there's also a potential way that somebody can mess with this data that you're processing. So don't consume this JSON raw and override the HTML because of this attack vector. I was like, I
Mm.
had no idea that was a thing, but it's like
Yeah.
a SQL injection, but with like JSON that's passed in. And it responded. It was like, it said like, do you wish to fix this? And I was like, yes. Clicked
Yes,
on it,
please.
rewrote the code, and I
Hmm.
looked at it and I'm like, oh, so it's going to stringify it, then process it, and kind of do it in a sandbox mode. I'm like, that's pretty cool. Like,
Yeah.
what a clever bot. And then I told one of my buddies, um, that's helping me with doing front end development right now. He's like, yeah, there's a better way to do that. And he like showed me a code snippet, and he's like, you could just like not do any of that and directly do it this way. And I'm like, oh, so just use the component directly. He's like, yeah, that's way more secure. I'm like,
Mm.
cool. Today I learned. But these tools, they adapt to, they have that contextual knowledge of, hey, this is a bad idea, and we can use that here and now today. We have to prompt it, or we have to make an egregious code mistake. But yeah, I don't think we're far off from, exactly as you said, integrated into a tool like VS Code. When you go to commit, it does a code scan. If you enable it, and it says, hey, I know you haven't touched this code in 14 months in this one module, but there's a CVE issued about this, 2 weeks ago. So I
Yeah.
rewrote it for you. Do you want to accept my changes? Yes or no?
Yeah. And now imagine that those agents are not only in your IDE, but they're also in your build system. They're
Hmm.
also crawling around in your Slack. They're also in your data lake. They're also watching every single log that coming into Splunk or whatever aggregation location. And they're just constantly watching, fixing, and streaming information to like the security leaders and then the business leaders. And they know the threshold of like when they should alert you and when they shouldn't, what they should fix by themselves versus ask you. Um, so it's like if I'm sharing my password with you in Slack, it'll just like pop up a thing and be like, hey, yeah, you shouldn't do that. I just reset your password. Don't do that again. By the way, I let your boss know. Um, like it's just going to be everywhere, fixing everything all the time, knowing that the attacker is trying to do the same exact thing with their bots all the time. So what's exciting about it is that it's going to fill in the cracks of like things that just aren't being looked at. Like the biggest way companies get hacked right now is devs go out, they spin up boxes, they put real data in it, and they leave it online. They just forget. And in a large company, this is easy to do, really
Hmm.
easy to do. And it's hard to constantly monitor what you have facing the internet at all times, every single port, every single IP. It's not hard for AI, super
Right.
easy for AI.
Yeah, we don't even have the ability to do that at Databricks anymore. um,
Yeah.
Years and years ago, yeah, like Michael, if you had joined when I joined, you could have done that. Like spun up an entire AWS account basically that was tied to the Databricks field account. You could start up any service you wanted. Now, good luck. Even on the engineering side, everything that we do is sandboxed, and there's timeouts, like aggressive, sometimes annoying timeouts. But once you think about it from a security perspective, you're like, oh, that's why they cycle my keys every 2 hours. Yeah, that's
Yep.
probably smart. Uh, so yeah, you have a fixed window to spin up something, dangerous. And when that window stops, everything shuts down. You have to reinitiate from scratch. And you can't even, there's not even a mode for you to type in a password. It doesn't exist. Everything is through configuration scripts that are through automated systems that, uses build servers basically that you don't have direct access to. So it's so locked down. Um, and when you're working on something, you're like, this is going to take me 12 hours to fix. and you end up having to restart 6 times while working on that. You're like, man, this sucks.
You know what's really exciting about that is, have you all heard of chaos engineering? I assume you have, from like Netflix.
Mhm.
I think they had chaos monkeys at some point. And so at the time, it was just like automation, like scripts, right? But what you'll be able to do soon is basically hire 1,000 different AI agents that have a certain amount of credentials, right? And they just go break things. They just walk down the street, kicking in windows. They turn off services. So now you get into like this Nassim Taleb anti-fragile concept, where they're trying to pull credentials. They're trying to hack you constantly. And the good bots are there defending and fixing and cleaning up at all times. And anytime the bad bots, which you've enabled, gets a win, that just gets cleaned up. So now the attacker actually does break in and they start trying these things. It's like, what are you talking about? What are you doing? We've been doing this. We've already tried all those doors and windows, and we have coverage, and we've already fixed all those things. So it's like, imagine an org that is constantly being hacked from the inside, and everything's being fixed almost in real time. Because AI has the time to do that. I mean, that's normally what a red team does, but it's so slow compared to that.
Can you
a human can only type so fast.
Yep.
And do so many things.
Can you speak to the importance of open source in the security world as it relates to the arms race between red and blue?
Yeah. I guess the main thing I would say there is that transparency of algorithm is going to be like the most important thing. So if everyone knows exactly what everyone else has, they know what types of vulnerabilities there are. Then it's just a question of like, how often are we testing for those things? What are we finding and what are we fixing? So I feel like the more of that's open and clear, this is very similar to like encryption algorithms. The most secure ones are open, right? And they are secure, like Raindoll for AES, for example. Raindoll is an open algorithm. Everyone knows how it works, but it still works. So I would say that is probably the future of security, is that you could fully describe exactly how your company works, all your internal systems, name your internal systems, name every interaction, publish a full architecture diagram, and you would not be any less safe. Right? So I think that speaks to the open source sort of model. The reason we don't do that now is because we know that the knowledge of how our stuff works is actually a danger to us. And that gap in between those two should not be there.
What will bridge that gap?
Having complete coverage of your security vulnerabilities in that open model.
Via
So
agents?
via agents, agents is probably what's going to get there, but via whatever method. If we had 2,000 person security teams, or we had just better automation even without AI, as long as we had full coverage, continuous coverage, never sleeping coverage, and it's high quality, and we were sure that nothing wasn't being looked at, right? Nothing was being ignored, then I think we could be like, yeah, we use Okta, we use Slack, we use all these different tools. This is our backend. We're AWS shop. And I mean, I feel like we're kind of getting there a little bit. And no one's ashamed to say we use TLS 1.3, right? So I think that's where it ends up going, is everyone will be in that situation. We use Azure, we use TLS, we use the following things. And ideally, that should not help the attacker at all.
Got it. Another question on that front. There's a perception that security is sort of just a cat and mouse race almost, where the hackers get a little better, we invest more in security, security gets better, then the hackers, all right, figure out something new, and it's this back and forth. Do you think that's a cycle that will always be perpetuated, or is there some way to stop that cycle?
No, I think that will always be there. Well, kind of. In a very distant, and I would say that I'm saying for like Google. Let's because the difference between Google and Jane's Bait Shop, and the IT shop at Jane's Bait Shop, which is also Jane, right? The difference between those is insane. So, right, when you find these insider threat situations, someone was selling TPU schematics to China, and they found it inside of Google. Well, that's because they probably have one of the best, probably maybe the best insider threat program. So it's like, for a top tier company like that has like the best security, the difference between red and blue, the time frame of between when the attacker finds it versus when the defender finds it and cleans it up, or maybe even the defender finds it first. That gap, that window of time gap is going to be so small. So it's going to approach, a limit of zero. For everyone else, that gap is still going to be large. I think this is where AI offers the most possible help, is to close that gap the most because of continuous watching and fixing.
So it's almost like arbitrage in finance.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yes.
That's super cool.
Yep.
I think the only way to protect yourself or the software stack that you're working on, like the only true protection is build something nobody cares about. Right? So people that are I've talked to, small organizations back when I was in the field at Databricks, and people are like, exactly what you asked, Michael, at the beginning of like your first engagement. I need a threat model for my system. And you sit there and ask, like, well, what do you guys do and what kind of data do you store? They're like, well, we don't store any PII data. There's nothing in our database that could ever be connected to a human being or like a business entity. Everything's been obfuscated, but we really want to make sure that nobody can get in there. And I'm like, can I see it since I'm under NDA? They're like, yeah. Like, here, do a select star and you can see the data. And I'm looking at it like, this is a matrix of floating point numbers. I have no idea what this is for. And they're like, well, is it secure? I'm like, yeah, it's you could put this onto a public AWS bucket and nobody will touch this because there's no contextual information here to be gained.
Secure because useless.
Exactly. But it means something to them because of, code that they have that can read that. I'm like, your security model is pretty darn good here. Make sure you have, for what that company was doing, they definitely would not want the code to be released with that data. And I was like, just make sure your repo is really locked down, like really locked down. And they're like, oh yeah, we totally, like, we have to go through 5 steps just to log into our GitHub account. I'm like, that's good. And make sure that you're monitoring all access to that. But the data, I wouldn't know anybody who would know what to do with that data other than you guys with your code base.
Yeah. So interesting, because here's the way I believe this works today. And I've seen this in multiple places. So what the attacker would do is they'd find the name of that system. Let's say it's called Charlemagne or something. They're like, okay, Charlemagne backend. The first thing attackers do now, this is part of this whole attacker economy, is they pull Confluence. They pull Google Docs. They read everything. They read the onboarding docs. They figure out how to onboard onto everything. And if it's good onboarding information, it'll be like, Charlemagne is the most important system ever. Oh, by the way, Charlemagne is super, super secure. The back end is super obfuscated. It's not useful at all. The Charlemagne front end is located at.
Yeah.
Turns out Chris is the admin to the Charlemagne system, and Chris really likes dogs. So they write a phishing campaign about, hey, do you want to adopt a dog? They send it to Chris. They compromise Chris's account. They go and pull all the data. They never mess with the Charlemagne system because it's secure. They compromise Chris and get it all through the front door.
So it really is. I mean, would an AI system, even if it was fabricated in such a way that's scanning every email, every Slack message, every means of communicating with somebody through their work computer, that would still have to extend to a personal computer too? Because maybe Chris, sometimes logs into some systems at work from his personal, like his phone or,
Yeah.
His computer at home, even though he shouldn't be doing that. Would these systems need to follow employees around on their devices, like wherever they connect?
Yeah, it depends on the type of security system. Like some will be very focused on logs and data and stuff like that, like traditional like network security. But if you have like an advanced security system, which all these platforms are going to be selling, it's going to start with startups first. It'll be like idea, application, startup, platform, right?
Mm-hmm.
So part of that is going to be, so there's a company called ZeroFox, which I think they're still around. They used to like defend executives against social media attacks. But it'll be the same sort of thing. So they'll be like, okay, Chris is one of the people, find in Okta or find in every single critical system, which you could find from the documentation, every single admin, add them to the VIP list, add all executives to the VIP list, add anyone with admin credentials of any type to the VIP list. Now for the VIP list, go build an OSINT recon protocol and profile for all of them, which does like a personality analysis and figure out what types of phishing emails they would click on.
Mm-hmm.
And now look for those types of emails being sent to them. Also give them training around not clicking on things related to that. So it's like you have to learn the attack surface inside of your company because you know the attacker is going to be doing the same. Especially since Chris is on LinkedIn talking about how he works at this company and how he loves dogs.
Yep.
Are humans going to consistently be the weak point in security systems? Like multi-factor authentication, for instance, was a game changer to some degree. Is there going to be something that makes humans secure?
Eventually, humans will become more secure. Oh, fascinating question. Humans will become more secure, not because they've actually got better, but because AI is sitting in front of them filtering. So for example, that email, and this will be in a security system very soon. I'm actually working on something similar. This will be in a system very soon. The email comes into Chris's email at work.com at his company. And it's like, hey, Chris, I see that you're a lover of animals. We're actually starting up a local dog rescue thing in your town, and we want you to be the leader of it. In fact, New York Times is coming to town to talk about it, and they'd like to interview you. The AI reads that and says, oh, this is targeting Chris, and Chris will click on this. So it rewrites the email, phishing email regarding dogs. Don't click. This has been, or it doesn't even send it to him. It actually just sends it to the security team and says, Chris was phished, but we didn't pass the email on to him. So, for example, if we're having this physical, let's say we're having this conversation in person, but we're all wearing AI glasses, and our AIs are listening, and you're trying to sell me a bridge in a state that doesn't have bridges, it's just going to pop up and be like, hey, this person is complimenting you. This person is talking about how awesome you are. This person also is running from the authorities in 3 different states. Also, there are no bridges in the state that he is talking about that he's trying to sell you a bridge in. So it's not that I wouldn't have purchased it. I was about to give you the money, but this thing popped up and protected me. And it turned off my bank account. So now it won't even work because it's protecting me from myself.
Got it. So it's another sort of arms race of filtering
Yes.
systems.
Yes, because those same AI systems are going to be trying to compromise that person at the same time that your AI system is trying to defend you against them.
I don't think I've heard a better scenario explained that kind of proposes the beneficence of advanced AI. I've heard a lot of people say like, oh, I don't want nanny AI. I don't want a system. I've even heard it from colleagues who are like at first, before they actually tried some of these new LLMs that are code-based focused, they're like, there's no way it can code better than me. And then a bunch of us are saying like, that's not the intention. It's not replacing you. It's augmenting you. It's helping you.
Augmenting, yes.
And it's saving you from the annoying process of writing doc strings. You've told me you hate doing that. It does that really, really well. So just let it do that. And then they try it a couple times. They're like, this is awesome. That took 3 seconds.
Right.
I'm good. I'm a believer. And I think for the lay people who are really terrified about AI, I see it on news clips all the time. And it's almost just boring now hearing it. Years ago, people are like, you see some local newscaster being like, have you seen the movie Terminator? It's like, oh, please shut up. But even for those people nowadays, they're talking about GPT-4 and OpenAI and Cohere, and you start hearing like the name drops of these big, model companies, and people are concerned about, oh, I don't know if we want this listening to us all the time. It's like your devices, the thing that is sitting right next to you on the desk, it's already listening to you. And people being concerned with having something that is watching them or listening to them, I think it becomes much more palatable for the general human on the planet when they are protected from getting their bank account drained by a scammer, which happens all the time. Robocalls that start, they're getting more and more sophisticated over time. Some of these things coming out of India, those call center houses. And you see it in the news, like some retiree, somebody's grandma just got $800,000 cleaned out in 2 weeks from some, love scam or something. And you're like, if people saw that these systems that are in active development to do something like that, like, hey, I'm listening to your calls and I'm going to warn you, or I'm going to prevent you from falling victim to this because this person is emotionally manipulating you, and that none of this is real, is legit. The human bias that is introduced by emotions is so hard to overcome for most people, and I think that's what a lot of attackers go after. It's like, hey, I can manipulate this person because Chris likes dogs. I'm going to show him a picture of a sad, abused dog, and he's going to want to he's going to want to see what's going on here. And to have a system that protects against that, I think that's going to make everybody a believer. Like, this stuff is really powerful.
I think the other thing that's going to make them a believer is just how useful it is to have a friend that's with you at all times, who knows everything about you and knows everything about your traumas and doesn't let you talk shit to yourself. You're like, I could never do that. That guy's too smart. I can't go in that show. That podcast talks about machine learning. And they're like, no, you're cool. You can go on there. You talk about AI as well. Like, you could do this. They'll like you. Like, it'll be cool. Just wear your blue hat. It'll be awesome. It's like, And you're like, I'm gonna stay in bed. Like, I can't go to the gym. It's like, no, you know you feel better when you go to the gym. You got to get up. Come on, it's gonna be fun. All right, 1, 2, 3, get up. Right.
Uh-huh.
And so that's going to be your best friend. But now it gets an upgrade from the company. Let's say it's OpenAI or whatever. Upgrade. Now propaganda filter. So every time you receive propaganda, I'm going to warn you. I might rewrite it. So it's like slowly over time, it's going to get more and more useful. But I think the deepest one is like people are alone.
Mhm.
It's hard to build friendships, especially when you get into your 30s. And this thing is going to know everything about you. Now, here's the flip side of this. You thought having your social security number compromised was bad? You thought having your bank accounts compromised was bad? This company providing this AI that is so amazing, it's integrated with your life, that's just a startup with regular people, and they run AWS, and they forget passwords, and they leave boxes online. There will be a breach of AI digital assistants at some point in the near future. And it won't be your social security number that you lose. It won't be your bank account that you lose. It'll be your soul.
Yeah. It's you.
It'll be your journal where you talk shit about your friends. You're like, yeah, I don't know. Michael, we do this podcast thing and he makes me mad sometimes and blah, blah, blah. And that got released. It's on Pastebin. Michael's reading what Ben said about Michael to his AI agent in the privacy of like some, sad time. And it's just all left out there. Your entire journal, like your traumas, everything. And it's like, that's going to sting. It won't stop people from using them. It'll just be a little tiny blip. And then the usage will go back up because it's too valuable. It's too valuable.
To that point, it seems like over the past 50 years, as technology has become more pervasive and entered daily life, there's a lot more of your, as you said, soul out there.
Yes.
It's sort of turning into 1984 where like thought crimes could become a thing. Do you think like we're headed in that direction, or is there a way to protect yourself? Like throw your cell phone into the toilet and go live in Alaska on like a farm. Is
A
that
lot
the
of people
solution?
will definitely do that. I think Karpathy said something like this, which I thought was really smart. Society will fragment into multiple different small societies. So you have like the Amish approach. It's like, I just can't do this. Me, I'm going to go the exact opposite direction. I'm going to have all my stuff in a personal API. It's like published, like maybe not my journal, like some also have some private entries, but largely I'm going to secure myself through transparency, more of an open source model. As the compromises start happening, and we saw this a little bit actually with the Me Too. What happens when the pendulum swings back is you realize everybody's broken.
Mm-hmm.
You realize the thing that got compromised that embarrassed me, Ben is like, actually, I kind of have those as well. And Michael's like, yeah, me too. In my worst moments, I kind of make those kinds of jokes as well. And pretty soon it saturates into the entire world and everyone's like, I'm no longer shocked about any of this because it turns out that's just what humanity does. So there's no more gotchas. There's no more gotchas.
Whoa, that's that's hitting. So everybody will know that everybody. I mean, I guess that makes sense. If there's this amount of openness, the societal sort of definition of what is taboo will shift to what is normal. And so if normal becomes
Yes,
a lot more open, then we're good.
that's right. Now, there is a flip side of that, which is the 1984 model, which is authoritarian government. If you remember this, I don't remember which Batman. I'm not into Batman, but there was one with it was a system. Batman wanted to build the system, and it listened to every single cell phone, and he needed this to be able to go and find the bad guys. And kind of the hero of the story, his buddy who built all the tech, was like, "Listen, if you build this, this will be a weapon, and I will build it for you, but I no longer work for you because someone else is going to come and use this thing as a weapon." So this amazing thing, which I am working to build for human reasons. I believe the purpose of AI is to magnify humanity. I don't care about the tech whatsoever. I care about humans interacting with humans. And AI is a way to make that happen in a better way, more secure way. But if Mao from China or Stalin had this tech, you absolutely get 1984. But
Definitely.
a scary, scary version of it because it sees and knows everything.
Yeah, you're not towing the party line. You are
Yeah.
an object of liquidation.
Yeah.
I mean, Stalin did that anyway. Like,
Well,
with how many millions of
absolutely.
people he killed.
Well, and he used people to do it. He
Yeah.
was like, go narc on your friends. But what happens when it's all the cameras and all the phones
Exactly.
and
So-
every single smart speaker?
Terminator plus Hitler plus 1984.
Exactly.
Great.
So
Terrific.
the trick isn't the tech. The tech can be like this wonderful human thing, or it could be Stalin in 1984. And that's a question of human control of the system.
So do you
Goddamn.
think that like, from having this perspective, which I also share, when you hear politicians attack technology, do you also hear in the back of your head, like I do, where I'm like, this is a society problem. This is a process problem, not a technology problem.
Absolutely.
But when they start
100%.
doing that attacking, they're like, oh, we need to regulate this industry and we need to, control how people do these things or how they use this. You're like, shouldn't you control how you're going to use this as a member of the government? Like, what's your role in this and why are you calling this out?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like some brakes, sorry, or bumpers need to be used. I just think so few people are thinking about this stuff the right way. The really scary thing to me is when I talk to friends who are not necessarily in the tech space, and I come to the dinner and I'm like, oh my God, what's going on? I'm building this. Like, you seen this latest thing? And they're like, is that I'm like, yeah, what are you building right now with AI? And they're like, do you mean Chat GPT? I think isn't that didn't that kind of blow over? I thought it was like really hyped up like 4 months ago and then it's just kind of died down. Yeah, I don't really use it. Can you pass the salt? And I'm like, holy crap.
Yeah.
They think, first
It
of
was
all, they
hype.
think AI is Chat GPT. Second of all, they think it peaked in hype and now it's going down. And I'm like, how do I talk to this person? And and the reason I continue talking to them is I'm like, listen, get ready, because if you think AI is bad at replacing, is bad because it's going to replace jobs, wait till AI is inside of a competent robot. When GPT-6 is inside of a robot that can crawl on its back under a house, take a picture of a broken pipe and reach up and actually fix the fitting, and it has the knowledge of all pipes and all fittings, plumbers and drivers and things like this are no longer safe. So when I hear somebody being like, isn't AI ChatGPT and didn't that blow over 4 months ago? I'm like, I fear for you.
Mhm.
Well, yeah, at least in the hardware space, we have a bit of a buffer, but in the software space, yeah. But the nice thing is you can learn to leverage the tools. But there's
Yes.
a lot of people that will be left behind if they don't do that. And it's
Yeah.
hard.
Absolutely. I mean, that's my whole vibe right now is this transition to what I'm calling human 3.0. I'm trying to build this structure. What does it look like to be a human that survives through this after AI has happened? And there's a use case for hope. So AI crushed humans at chess in 2000 or 99, whenever that was.
Mhm.
Deep Blue beat Kasparov. And it was That was it. Humans, and what's crazy about it is humans aren't getting any better. Like Carlson is a little bit better than Kasparov, but not that much. In the meantime, my iPhone crushes Deep Blue.
Yeah.
So, but here's what's really exciting about that. 2024, so 25 years later, chess is the most popular it's ever been. In the history of all chess, it is the most popular it's ever been right now. And nobody is watching computers play computers. They're only watching humans play humans. And to me, that's a signal of hope that ultimately the tech can beat us, but we still care about the human to human interactions.
But there's sort of a cutoff because it's more like art based. Like the writer's strike, for instance, is a good example. Like I don't want to see, I mean, AI generated art is cool, but I typically want to see something created by a human. But in the sort of profit world and the like cold business world, maybe it's a bit different.
Well, so I think the trick is combining those, right? So right now, how many Steven Spielbergs are there? One, 20, 1,000, 100? Not many. How many people on the planet? 8 billion. Cool. How many people have had an idea for a series or a movie that's as good or better than Steven Spielberg? And then now imagine the gates in between them having that idea and being able to make a movie like Saving Private Ryan. The gates are you in LA? Do you know the people who can get this done? Do you also have access to millions of dollars? Do you also have access to the acting talent? Okay, now remove all those gates because the whole thing is AI generated with AI actors. But it has just as much impact on somebody as if they watch Saving Private Ryan. And so it is a completely human story. They made it up. They said what the actors do. They have the same amount of control that Steven Spielberg does. But the art, the acting, the production, the visuals, cinematography, everything, it's all done by AI. So some 13-year-old kid in Nairobi makes the next Saving Private Ryan for $38, and it crushes. It gets an Oscar. And I think that's what's exciting about the future is that won't be an AI thing. That will be a human thing, which AI made for the human.
That makes sense. Sold.
Now, there is slightly scary is the AI that's really smart can be like, oh, that was really cool. Can I try? And you're like, okay, go for it. And it makes something even better. And then you're like, do we give it an Oscar? Should we name this thing? What do we do?
Right.
And that's where you got to start wondering, do you just say, even though it can make a better movie, kind of like chess? Nobody watches chess computers play each other. Do you just say that you don't allow them to make movies? They must come from the human. But that gets really difficult because it's like the human could just basically hire one of these things, give it an idea, it goes and makes the whole thing, and then the human puts their name on it. So
that reminds me of a conversation that I had with a Databricks customer a while ago in the video game industry, and they're a very big studio. They're using AI, their own custom built AI, to build bots that play video games.
Yep.
And years ago, people did the like, hey, we built a bot that can play like Pong really well, and then we built one that could play, Super Mario Brothers, and it beats it in world record time by doing frame analysis. And then fast forward a little bit, and like, yeah, we've got a bot that can play some of the most complex video games out there. So reinforcement learning systems that are trained really well with custom architectures, they can play a game like Call of Duty, and they have the only access that they have. They don't have access to the game engine. They only have the same access that a human would have. So whatever's rendered on screen and input controls that humans can have. They
Yep.
can push the buttons faster or move you know, a virtual mouse, the reticle much faster and more accurately than a human can. But what they're doing in these systems where they're running these simulations is playing bot versus bot, not to see who wins. Well, they kind of do. So they want to give an important rule set to a bot to say, hey, learn what you can about the engine and see if you can break this. And it's basically
Yeah.
just your optimization is to get a really good kill to death ratio in this game.
Mhm.
So go nuts, and it will find and exploit patterns that would take an exceptional person to figure out, somebody with high creativity, but it's doing just brute force and just trying stuff. And then it's like, hey, I'm now dominating because I'm doing this really weird thing where I throw a grenade at the corner of a building and it bounces just right off of this other location and it kills the enemy every time. So it starts doing that over and over and over.
It's a whole QA team, right?
It's like they're running something like 10,000 instances of a game in parallel every 10 minutes. And
Imagine
so
how
it's
many
like,
human testers you would need for a QA team to be able to replicate that amount of coverage.
they know, actually. They're like, we would need 1 million people to do this.
There you go. There you go.
That was like play testers.
And that's before the update to the AI, which comes out next Thursday, right? It's like,
exactly. So the interesting thing, I mean, I geeked out because I'm a gamer and have been since I was a kid. And I was like asking this guy, I was like, dude, so have you ever played against it? He's like, oh yeah, yeah. I'm like, well, how'd you do? He's like, it's like playing against a cheater.
Yeah.
He's like, you can't win against these things. I'm like, well, what if you just don't allow it to go far enough in its training iteration cycle and you just kind of like stop it after, a couple thousand rounds? He's like, well, it doesn't really work like that. A couple thousand rounds, it's pretty dumb if it hasn't been initialized, but a couple million rounds, then yeah, I might kill it once.
Yep.
And I was like, well, one versus what? He's like, one versus like 299 deaths. I was like, wow, that's crazy. I was like, so you can't like put in, one of these systems into an actual video game, can you? He's like, nobody would buy the game,
right?
Because you just would lose, and nobody wants that experience. He's like, but they're great tools because they help us automate something that is meant for humans, but we just can't play this game at this level ever. I was like, well, how good could it possibly get? He's like, I wish I could show you, put it into a match, with you against some people, and you could see for yourself. He's like, but I don't care how good you are at our games. He's like, you wouldn't win any of it. Like, you wouldn't make any progress in any of our games playing against these things. It's like, wow.
So that's what security agents are going to become, in your opinion, Daniel?
I think security agent is not quite the same metaphor because it's not a direct on direct, like perception versus activity speed. I would say system versus system. That's probably true. So think of security agents, China versus the United States. Okay. So give 1 million security agents on each side the goal of attacking and owning all the critical infrastructure of the other country. That's the level of the game. That's like the big game. Because you have to find the systems, you have to hack the systems, you have to prioritize the systems. And then you have to be able to say, given a certain type of kinetic scenario in like a real war, what would I want to target to most disable the other adversary? And there's no way that a human team is going to compete in that game because there's just too much data. There's too many moving parts. And that's where agents are going to have the massive advantage. I really recommend this book called Life 3.0. Have you heard of that?
Hmm.
Quite amazing. It's Max Tegmark. The opening chapter for this book is like one of the most exciting pieces of AI writing you will ever read. It's actually I won't tell you. It's a little bit of a spoiler, but you want to basically read the first chapter. It's unbelievable, and you should just finish the whole book. You probably will after that. Hey, can I go grab another protein shake?
Sure. I was actually going to mention we're about at time. So,
Oh, well, then I think we're good then.
yeah. Cool. So I will wrap. That we didn't even get to like the question that I wanted to ask that we were discussing before recording, but that's what happens when you have a freeform podcast. Really, really cool discussion. So, a few things that stood out to me: the personality of a good security engineer is typically curiosity combined with tenacity combined with discipline. Those three make a dynamic combination. The purpose of security is to feel safe, and you're not looking to have 100% airtight systems. It's more of a like ROI calculation on how you should spend your time for each threat vector. For assessing the probability of a risk occurring, just assign bins of like super high, medium, low, etc. It's often not worth assigning exact probability calculations to these, and also doing that calculation is not a trivial matter. And sort of taking a step back from the future of security perspective, it's typically going to be AI agent based, and there's going to be a movement towards sort of open sourcing architecture for your organization, and that will actually allow for the greatest amount of transparency, but also the greatest amount of security. Currently, that's not the case, and if users know about your system, that will actually be detrimental. But in the future, sort of like open sourcing algorithms, open sourcing your architecture will be helpful. And then finally, AI is going to filter stuff that makes your emails less phishing oriented. So, Daniel, if people want to learn more about you or your work, specifically your organization, Unsupervised Learning, where should they go?
So you could search for Unsupervised Learning podcast or Unsupervised Learning newsletter, and you'll probably find it there. It's also Unsupervised Learning on YouTube. You can find me there. Starting to put out more content there. And there's also one particular piece called AI's Predictable Path, which talks about a lot of the stuff that we talked about today. It's actually my longest post I've ever written. It's like 9,000 words. And I spent like 20 hours on the art, AI art, of course. But that kind of encapsulates a lot of the stuff we talked about, especially around the agents and agents defending their principal and sort of keeping them safe. So definitely want to check that one out.
Awesome. Well, it has been an absolute pleasure. And until next time, it's been Michael Burke and my co host,
Ben Wilson.
and have a good day, everyone.
We'll catch you next time.